Window light can be the most flattering light that a photographer can use, and this is because the window acts as a natural diffuser, really softening the light as it comes in onto the subject. So if you're lucky enough to have a lot of windows or a really large window, you can get this great effect as you see in this image where the light really wraps around the subject and is quite flattering. But most of us are just working with one window. And we give you this assignment this early in the semester because it's really challenging and it's very difficult to meter and expose for this. So looking at this image that's on the screen right now, a common mistake is to underexpose your image. Even if you're using neutral exposure, if you set your camera up and you set your meter and it's in the middle, it's at 0 or neutral, it's still going to end up looking like this. And why is that? It's because we have this really bright light source in the back of the image coming forward, and that's telling our camera that there's a lot of light in the image. But in reality, our subject doesn't have a lot of light on them, so they come out being underexposed. This bright light, you can also see this effect if you're photographing in snow or by water, or if you include a lot of sky in your image. So always be aware that your meter's not always 100%. It's very smart and it knows how to average a scene. But when you have bright light like this, it starts to get confused, and we have to override that. So there's a few ways you can uh, meter differently for this. The first is you take your meter reading of this scene and you overexpose it by a stop, and you overexpose it by 2 stops, and you see what that looks like. And you kind of do trial and error until you see what kind of exposure works best. An even more accurate way to do this is to get right up close to the subject, use your camera, meter for your subject, so just take a meter reading of this lady's face, and then move back. And when you move back, your meter is going to look like it's way far off, but still use that original meter reading that you took off of the subject's face, and you'll have her exposed properly. The background might get blown out, but your subject will have the proper exposure. And that's what we're looking for. We want the subject, the most important part of the image, to have a good exposure. That's called exposing for your subject. The third idea that we have is to move the window out of your image. So here the man's looking towards the light source and he has beautiful light coming across him. But the window's taken out of the scene, so you can easily just use your regular metering techniques and take an image and it'll be well exposed. So by moving the window out of the scene, you're going to have a lot easier time exposing your image. The next thing you can do is to add a reflector. So using a reflector, you're just going to bounce light that's coming in onto your subject. So you have your reflector and you kind of point it towards the sun and then move it towards your subject until you see that light bouncing back into your subject. And you'll lighten up the dark areas. So here you can see that the model is holding the reflector. If it's just 2 of you, that's fine. Just get in close and crop that reflector out of the image, and you can still have a reflector used being held by your subject and get that effect. Most of you guys won't have an reflector, and that's fine. You can use a piece of poster board. You can cover something with aluminum foil, and having that white or that silver bounce back the light is enough light that it will really impact your image. You'll be surprised. Here's a really great image with wonderful window light coming across the subject. And if we just had a little bounce back, a little light reflected back into the right side of the image on his face, that would have really filled out the image. Still keeping the depth of the light side and the dark side, but just lightening it up a little bit so we didn't lose that detail on the right side. And then this is an example of an image. I know this is outside and not window light, but we see the light coming in really harsh on the left side of the image, and the right side is underexposed. So we have overexposed and underexposed. And if the photographer had used a reflector here, she could have bounced back light onto that dark side of the face and evened it out, and then taking that photograph, because it would have had more even light, you wouldn't have had the shadow or the really bright area. Would have really evened it out and been a lot easier to photograph. So play around with this. You guys will have a lot of questions and ask them, and just experiment and have fun. Window light's beautiful. Watch the light as it's coming in. If it's harsh or if it's soft, that soft light's going to be really nice and really easy to use. So just watch the window throughout the day and see how the light changes. And good luck to everyone. Ask me questions.